Hi there. As we move into the second portion of our pre-writing for this first essay, the critical response essay, I want to take a couple of minutes to give you a tool that you can use to analyze the article that you've chosen to cover for this first essay assignment. So whenever you go to pick up your article and you really start thinking about how effective the author actually was, and you're looking at certain aspects of the writing and trying to make sense of it, I want you to remember CRAPS as an approach, and it's sort of a funny acronym, but hopefully it's easy to remember. So when you want to analyze an article, go ahead and analyze the CRAPS out of it, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. So when we're talking about CRAPS, it's really just a way for you to remember context, reader, author, purpose, and style. So these are aspects of the writing that you're going to want to really dig into as you get into your analysis. So first we'll talk about context. I'm going to use an article, The Epidemic of Facelessness, that was published in the New York Times as an example. It was written by Stephen Marsh in the op-ed section of the New York Times on February 14th, 2015. And this article discusses essentially the effects of online interactions and how taking face-to-face communication essentially takes away our empathy as humans, and it leads to bullying and other negative effects. So if we're looking at context, a couple of the questions we're asking are these here. So where was the article published? So I have students come into class all the time and say, hey, I read this article that said this. And I always say, well, where did you find it? Where was it published? And they say, well, on the internet. Well, the internet's a very big place. And the website itself that it was published on is actually very important. In MLA formatting, we call it the container. That is where it appears. And this one appears in the New York Times. And that already tells us an awful lot about the expectations into which this article was written, the expectations surrounding it. It can tell us a lot about the angle of vision that the author might have or share with the publication at large. So always look at the website, the publication where it is published. Is it the type of publication that comes out in print as well? Because that matters in terms of credibility. Is it a fashion magazine? Is it a website that's geared towards the ultra-conservative audience? Is it geared towards the ultra-liberal audience? Is it a publication that prides itself on staying down the middle politically? Those are questions you need to ask, and you need to do some research if you're not sure. Click around the website. Take a look at the other articles that are published. Take a look at the political slant that you see in articles that are published there. You also want to look at the historical and cultural context. So what that means is, so this was written in 2015. So what was happening in terms of technology and human interaction in 2015? So that was a few years ago. So we've changed some of our opinions about that. We've done a lot of pushing back on social media. But back then, I think people were just beginning to question the long-term effects of interacting in a digital format rather than face-to-face. And I don't think we had a lot of clear ideas about that effect. And I think bullying was just kind of rearing its ugly head in the online arena. So what also was the cultural context? What was happening culturally in the United States during that time? These are questions to ask because this provides essentially the context into which the article was written. It provides a lot of the purpose for the article. So it's important to think about what was happening around when your article was published. What type of publication or website is it published under? I talked a little bit about that. So is it a print publication? Is it a publication that's meant for mass consumption? Is it meant to speak to one political side or the other? Is it a website devoted to selling products? It's important to dig into these questions. What kinds of issues does the publication cover? Does it cover world, local news? Does it cover human interest stories? Does it cover fashion? Does it cover sports? So it's important to know, again, the context. That's everything surrounding the article. What's the purpose of the publication? So the New York Times exists essentially to inform and to educate. It also, I think, has a persuasive slant to it as well, as do most I think, news publications these days. But that's really evident in the angle of vision. That is essentially the perspective that the publication takes. The angle of vision you can also think about in terms of kind of bias. What are their interests? What are they trying to promote? And how does that affect the way they present information and evidence? We move on to reader. So I'm going to ask you to define the target audience. Who is the intended audience for your article? And I want you to try to figure out the age, gender, education level, race, political stance, interests, values, socioeconomic status, or anything else you can try to come up with for the intended audience. When I ask who the target audience is, the answer is never everyone. Nothing is ever written for absolutely everyone. So you have to dig in, do some research, and see what's the age range for the people that are going to go to this publication, for the people that are going to be interested in reading this article. Does it appeal to the 18 to 35 audience? Does it appeal to 30 to 65-year-olds? Some publications will have a broader audience than others, so it's important to really think about the publication you're dealing with at that moment. Think about the gender. So is it slanted more towards the male audience or the female audience? Education level. This becomes evident when you examine the language usage, the style of the piece. The length of the piece can indicate education level as well. You can also glean some of this information from digging around in the publication itself, the container itself. Race, political stance, interests, values. Socioeconomic status has to do with class, essentially. You can think of it that way. Is it written to appeal to lower class citizens? Is it meant to appeal to middle class, upper class citizens? You can get a lot of that information, again, by digging around in the publication, in the advertisements featured in the publication, and just in various pieces that you'll see in the actual writing itself. And then how do you know? That's just a question pointing you towards generating evidence. What did you actually see that told you this? Because you're going to need to provide that evidence when you actually go to draft. And then how well does the text suit its particular audience? Okay. Who's the author? So we'll move on to that. All of these articles will have an author listed. And sometimes the author's name is linked to a bio that you can go into and explore. Sometimes you have to do a little bit of digging on the internet. Usually they'll tell you a little something about the author at the end of the article. So it tells you he also works for Esquire and he wrote The Hunger of the Wolf. But you still might need to do some digging. And in doing some digging, I found Stephen Marsh's website, where it describes everything that he's had published. It even links to his podcast, gives a brief bio about him, even a way to contact him. So this, do some research, use Google, and figure out who the author is. Figure out what credibility they bring into the piece. This is asking about inherent credibility. That is, before they ever write a word, do they have your trust as a reader? Does the fact that they're published in the New York Times give them some credibility? Does the fact that they've published other articles elsewhere, does that help? If they're a staff writer, does that give them credibility as well? If they have a certain education level, if they hold a certain position, what kind of credibility do they bring into it with them? And then how do they earn credibility in the text itself? So how do they build their credibility? Could be the use of strong support. Their tone can build credibility. Their language usage can build credibility. Their ability to maintain balance and to remain unbiased can bring credibility to an argument as well. And then to what extent are they actually relatable to the audience? Are they trying to meet the audience where they are and establish some sort of rapport with the audience? How do they do that? And then how does that lend itself to their credibility? What's the writer's purpose? So moving on to P. What is the writer's purpose? Are they trying to persuade? Are they trying to inform? Are they trying to sell something? Are they trying to get you to vote a certain way or to contact your representative? Why did they write the piece? What are they trying to get at? Are they being explicit about their purpose? Are they letting you know what they want from you, or are they needing to be a little bit more subtle in going about persuading you to their point of view? And why might they need to be more subtle about it? How do you know their purpose? Again, are they coming out and stating it, or is it something you have to infer from the text itself, slowly but surely? And then how well does the text suit its particular purpose? So do you feel like it fulfilled its purpose? Is it persuasive? Is it effective? And that kind of moves towards the larger question of your analysis. And then finally, style. So it's examining those little pieces that make up the whole. So how do the author's voice, that is the tone, the way it sounds, the way they're approaching the reader, their language choices, their diction, their word usage, sentence length and complexity, how does it contribute to the text impact? So all those little elements from the text, how does it impact the overall persuasiveness or effectiveness of the text? You can also take a look at the use of photographs or images. You can look at the use of hyperlinks throughout the text whenever you're examining style. So all of this works together just to kind of point you in the right direction with your analysis. So whenever you pick up your article again, working on your next bit of pre-writing before we actually get to the drafting stage for this essay, I want you to think about context, reader, author, purpose, and style. If you have any questions, please let me know.